Hey everyone, I am Magical Hacker, and this is episode number 8 of the Eminence Podcast, the non-CEDH Commander podcast, where I help you in the command zone with your deck building skills, and on the battlefield with your deck piloting skills. This podcast is brought to you by Marmot and the rest of my patrons at patreon.com/magicalhacker. Today's topic, chosen by Marmot, is the question, is Boompile still good or now bad in Commander? So first of all, to really answer this question, we've first got to talk about what Boompile is. So let me read this off real quick. Boompile is a 4 mana artifact, costs just 4 generic, has only one ability. It's an activated ability, you pay for it by just tapping it, and then it says this, flip a coin, if you win the flip, destroy all non-land permanents. And that's it. It's only got one ability, only has 2 lines of text. That's Boompile, right? Sounds pretty simple. When I had a more fully fledged, like a more fleshed out YouTube channel, I did have a podcast at that time, and I did an episode of the podcast talking about Boompile a while ago. And so a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about today is similar to what I mentioned in that video. If you want to see a lot of the same stuff rehashed, maybe a different perspective, feel free to go take a look there. I'll post a link to that here on the description, either on Spotify if you're watching on Spotify podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, you'll find that in the description down below, a link to that YouTube video. But when I had that YouTube channel, I talked about how I loved Boompile. At the time, I had in all 16, I think actually at that time I had maybe almost 32 Commander decks, and I literally played Boompile in 100% of them. And I didn't even do that to Sol Ring. There were, I think, 1 or 2 decks where I felt Sol Ring would not be a good addition, and so I was not playing Sol Ring in those decks. But I was certainly playing Boompile, and so it's kind of crazy to think about Boompile as being a card that somebody out there, somewhere on the internet, is playing it more than Sol Ring. So I understand it sounds a little silly, but I think by the time we finish talking about Boompile, you'll probably see why I was thinking that, my thought process, how you can apply it, and how you can use that card in a more, I guess you could say, counterintuitive way that actually makes it better than you would think. So let's talk about what makes Boompile unique. And I'd like to start off by talking about how I even came about playing Boompile. So one of the first few decks I had on my YouTube channel at that point was Atali Primal Storm. The first one I had built, I think, was Dragon Lord Silumgar, and the second one I had done was Atali Primal Storm. I don't need to read off the commander. Essentially, all you need to remember is that this was a mono-red deck. The commander allowed me to cast some spells from my opponent's libraries, and from my library too. But I was playing a red deck, and when I build a commander deck, which I'll definitely talk about how I do, how I go about building a commander deck in a later episode. I think it's going to be next episode. When I build that commander deck, one of the things that I like to do is I like to start off with 4 board wipes. There are some exceptions for where I don't play board wipes, but typically in my commander decks, I'll play 4 board wipes. If it's related to the theme, sometimes I'll play more than 4. And then only, I think, in Storm decks is the only place I don't play 4 board wipes. I play, I think, just 2. But every other place I play 4 board wipes, and I specifically choose some board wipes where 2 of them, at least, if possible, are going to be trying to get rid of all creatures for a low CMC. So I'm not so worried about any other effects. I just want to have a low CMC way to deal with creatures, at least 2 of those board wipes. Then the other 2 cards could be ways that, maybe I get some additional benefit, or maybe I'm getting rid of other permanents besides just creatures, but I want to get rid of things, and I'm really focused more so on just being able to get rid of everything. So sometimes there's a card like, for example, Decree of Pain. It's an 8 mana board wipe, only gets rid of creatures, but I get to draw a bunch of cards off of it, which is really nice, and I use that a lot. But when I was building this red deck, I had a couple of cards that I definitely wanted. So I knew I wanted Blasphemous Act. And then the other creature board wipe that I liked was Chain Reaction. I liked that one a lot, and so I definitely wanted to go for that one. And then I was playing a lot of enchantments in that deck, but I still felt that, maybe All is Dust would be a pretty good idea. I don't lose my artifacts, and people don't lose their artifacts, but at least I get to use all his dust, and that's okay. If I remember correctly, that's what I went for. But then the last slot, I was like, well, I definitely want something that can get rid of everything, and so I was kind of stuck with a couple of options. The 3 that I had really whittled it down to and was trying to decide among was Nevinyrral's Disc, Oblivion Stone, and Boompile. So let me read those other 2 cards here real quick. Nevinyrral's Disc also costs 4 mana. It's also an artifact. This one, however, enters the battlefield tapped, and then it has an ability you can pay 1 generic mana and tap it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. And so you can see a little bit of how that's similar to Boompile. Oblivion Stone was certainly a little bit more different. It cost 3 mana as an artifact, and then it had 2 activated abilities. The first one, you can pay 4 mana, tap it to put a fate counter on target permanent. The second ability here, you pay 5 mana, tap, and sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters from all permanents. So these are the 3 that I was left with, and for each one of them, I had a couple of things that I liked about it. Like, okay, in this situation, I like that and that and that. So with Oblivion Stone and Boompile, I liked these 2 things. The fact that if I was in a pinch and I was going to die on my next turn if I didn't do something, I could use both of these cards to destroy everything. Right? That was nice about it. Nevinyrral's Disc enters battlefield tapped, and so I wouldn't have a way to use it right away. I would always have to wait a turn before I could use Nevinyrral's Disc. So that kind of sucked. One thing I liked about Nevinyrral's Disc and Boompile was that I didn't have to spend a whole lot of mana on it, right? So if I only had 5 lands, Nevinyrral's Disc would work just fine. I could, play the Nevinyrral's Disc, wait a turn, pay the 1 mana, I'd be okay. Same thing with Boompile. Oblivion Stone, I would be forced into waiting a turn cycle just like with Nevinyrral's Disc. So let's say I only had 5 lands, and I would need to get rid of everything right now. Nevinyrral's Disc and Oblivion Stone were both no good. And something that I found out later on was that was a situation that was going to come up more often than I would think. A situation where I have 5 or 6 lands or sources of mana. I can only produce 5 or 6 mana. I'm about to die if I don't do something right now to clear away the board. I've got to have something that gives me at least some chance. So with Nevinyrral's Disc, the percentage of the time I could do that, 0%. Oblivion Stone, 0%. And then Boompile was 50%. And so it wasn't a 100% thing. But in my mind, I was like, you know what? It's better than 0%. I want to be able to deal with that situation. So even though I was playing All Is Dust, I felt like, well, this is, I think, an okay idea. I think I was also considering Ugin. And then I had decided All Is Dust is 7 mana. Ugin is 8. I think I'd rather go for the thing that costs just 1 less mana. Because what if I'm at 7 mana and I need to cast a board wipe? Well, then Ugin's not going to do me any good. I need to be able to go for something else. And I guess there could be an argument to be made for using Oblivion Stone over All Is Dust. But again, I didn't want to have to wait if I didn't have that 7 mana. So I ended up going with All Is Dust and Boompile as the last 2 options of ways that I could get rid of other permanents. And so Boompile was literally the only thing I had in the deck that could deal with enchantments other than my Chaos Warp. So I had Chaos Warp as a spot removal that could get rid of an enchantment. The only board wipe that I had for enchantments was Boompile. And honestly, when I had built this, I was thinking, okay, this is not an ideal card. I don't want to be playing this card, but it's my only option. I'm playing mono red. I do want to have a card that can deal with it. And comparing it to everything else that I have found up to this point, it looks like it's the best option. Not a great option, but the best option. And looking back now, I mean, it was pretty soon afterwards that I realized how wrong I was, that I had not understood the glory, I guess you could say, how amazing Boompile is, because I did not think to use it in the counterintuitive ways to get an advantage until I actually played with it and had it in my hand and figured out these things while playing with it. It was not during the deck building process that I thought about that. So I say this whole story to say that Boompile, one of the uniquely good things about it is that you can play it in any color. That's not true of all board wipes. Many board wipes do fall into that category. But as we go through more categories, you'll see that each one of these categories can be a very important element. And when you apply all of them at the same time, you only are left with Boompile. So the first thing is it's playable in any color combination. And part of that here is It's something that you can do right away. And I guess I kind of already touched on the second point here, which is that it hits all non-lands. There are other things that can do it. If we're talking about roughly the same mana equivalents, the first thing that I think of is Hour of Revelation. It's technically a 6 mana sorcery, costs 3 generic and 3 white, but it has an ability that as long as there's 10 or more non-land permanents on the battlefield, it costs 3 generic less mana to play. So instead, it can cost just 3 white. And then it has the ability to destroy all non-land permanents. So this card, very similar to Boompile, in that 3 mana versus Boompile's 4 mana. And then the benefit, you would think, is that Hour of Revelation allows you to destroy everything, no flipping coins. You can just go straight to that. Which is certainly nice about how both of these cards are 4 mana or less and can destroy or remove all non-land permanents either to the graveyard or to the exile zone, right? Those are examples of permanently removing them. And so those 2 cards are great for that. But is it really better for Hour of Revelation to do it in a way that that is less reliable? And here's where I think it gets a little tricky. When people look at Nevinral's Disc and Oblivion Stone, their brains just immediately think about, okay, when the Boompile goes, or sorry, when the Nevinral's Disc goes off, it destroys the Nevinral's Disc, so it might as well say sacrifice. And I think people apply that to the Boompile as well. Just naturally, when we look at the Boompile, when we think about it working, it destroys itself, of course. So when we think about it not working, we don't realize that when it doesn't work, you still have a Boompile, right? Instead, we think of, I don't want to play Boompile because then I don't know what it's going to do. Is it going to do the board wipe or is it going to do nothing? And that's not the case. It actually will board wipe, just a matter of time. Boompile, though, the unreliability of it is a benefit, not a downside. So if we are thinking about someone trying to get around the Boompile effect by protecting their board state, it actually becomes a lot harder to do that. So let me read off 2 cards here that I think will give you an idea of how good it is. So the first one I'd like to read off is Heroic Intervention. This is a green instant that says, and it costs 1 generic and 1 green, and it says it has the ability, permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So one benefit here is that not only do you get the indestructibility, you also get hexproof. So some people play it as a way to get rid of both spot removal, kind of countering that, and being able to get rid of board wipes. And so people play it for that. Teferi's Protection is the other card. Costs 2 generic and a white, also an instant. And it says, until your next turn, your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. Phasing out is a term that used to be only on old cards. Now it's kind of phased back in, no pun intended. So the reminder text here says, while they're phased out, they're treated as though they don't exist. They phase in before you untap during your untap step. And then the last thing this card says is that you exile Teferi's Protection as it resolves. So Teferi's Protection and Heroic Intervention are both 2 very cheap cards that you can cast at instant speed to protect all of your non-land permanents, and in these cases as well, actually your lands, if you need to protect your lands from being destroyed. Protects everything from a board wipe. They also do other stuff too, but that's kind of one of the important deals for why people play them. So if I play a Nevinral's Disc, I wait that turn, and then I activate it. Somebody can play a Teferi's Protection in response, and then I destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, except for that player's permanents. There's permanents stay alive. If I have an Oblivion Stone and I activate it, somebody in response to the second activation can cast a Teferi's Protection. Now all their things phase out. When they go back to their next turn, it'll phase back in, so they'll be the only ones with those permanents. With Boompile, there are 4 things that could happen. We play the Boompile, we activate it. Now we have the ability on the stack. We have not yet flipped the coin. We don't know if it's going to be a win or a loss. At this point is when people need to decide, will they play that board wipe protection spell, the Teferi's Protection, or the Heroic Intervention? Do they cast it? Or do they hold on to it? Right? Because if they cast it, and then the Boompile is a success, then they're good, right? But if they cast the spell, and the Boompile fails, now they've wasted that card on nothing. The Boompile's still around, and it's about to be untapped as well, and so now they're without that board wipe protection. However, if they're on the other hand, they say, well, I don't know that the Boompile is going to work. Maybe it'll fail this time. I'm not going to cast it right now. If that's what happens, and then the Boompile has failed, we're back at where we started, right? So the percentage from that point on goes back to the original. So in other words, that possibility is going to be equal to the other 3 possibilities combined. And then the last possibility is I'm not going to play my board wipe spell, my anti-board wipe spell, the one that protects me from board wipes. The Boompile goes off, and then it also wins, and now you've wasted an opportunity where you could have used your board wipe spell, your board wipe protection spell. All right. So of those 4 situations, we have the what I'll say cast, referring here to the board wipe protection spell, cast and win the flip, cast, lose the flip, no cast, win the flip, no cast, lose the flip. Of those options, no cast, lose the flip is going to have its results equal to the average of the other 3 results. So in reality, we can just ignore that and say there are really 3 possibilities with Boompile. The cast, win the flip, cast, lose the flip, and no cast, win the flip. So in 2 of those situations, cast, lose the flip, and no cast, win the flip, the benefit belongs to the person who has the Boompile. And in the third possibility, no cast, cast, win the flip, the person who casts the board wipe protection spell has a win. So the benefit to Boompile is that instead of always losing to a board wipe protection spell like you would with Hour of Revelation, now 2/3 of the time you're going to get the actual benefit here. So it's kind of like built-in protection against the board wipe protection spells. It's a little bit of an answer to the answer, which is really nice. So that purposeful unpredictability is the third benefit here that makes Boompile unique. The first one being playable in any color combination. The second one is that it hits all non-lands for 4 mana. The third one here is that it's purposely unpredictable to prevent board wipe protection from working as efficiently. And then the fourth one is when, not if. And this I kind of touched on already, but let me go back a bit here. So with a lottery ticket, there's an expression that I've heard before is that lottery tickets are a tax on people who are bad at math. It's kind of a little bit like a joke. I don't know how much I personally believe in it. For the record, though, I don't buy lottery tickets. I feel like they're not worth the money for me personally. If you do that, power to you. I hope you enjoy. I hope you have fun. I hope you win. But lottery tickets, personally, I don't think they're worth it for me. And when I look at Boompile, it is kind of like a lottery ticket. Imagine, though, you could buy a lottery ticket where your chance of winning was 50%. So you buy that lottery ticket. Let's say you buy that lottery ticket for $1, and your chance of winning $100 is 50%. So half the time you're going to pay $1 and get nothing, and then the other half of the time you're going to pay $1 and get $100. Is Boompile costing $1 and giving you $100? I'm not sure. That's not the point of the story, though. So or of the point of the analogy. So Boompile, you have this. The difference is with that lottery ticket. Imagine though, whenever you lost, instead of getting nothing, instead you got a lottery ticket for the next week, the same value. Then that means you pay that $1 for that lottery ticket. No matter what, eventually you will be able to turn it into $100. It might be this week. It's 50% chance. Of the 50% chance that it's not this week, it'll be next week, right? And so a 50% chance then. So 25% of the time, it'll be next week. 50% of the time, you'll get your $100 this week. 25% of the time, you'll get your $100 next week. 12.5% of the time, you'll get your $100 3 weeks from now. 6.25%, you'll get it 4 weeks from now. 3.125%, you know, and so on and so forth. So eventually, you're going to get that $100. It's a guarantee. You just don't know when it's going to happen. So it's a when, not if. So even if you were to say, well, I don't want to play a card that I don't know if it's going to be doing the thing, you can say, if you play that Boompile, unless you lose before the Boompile works, the Boompile is eventually going to work. It's eventually going to get there. So we don't know when. Most likely it'll be right away. That's the most likely of all the possible scenarios. If you compare each one to one. But if you were to compare working right now versus working at any point later on, those are equally likely. So it's a matter of just, can you wait or not? And like I mentioned with the other options, sometimes those are built in, you have to wait. And sometimes they just cost a lot of mana. Neither one of those is Boompile. You can do it right away, potentially working right away, and it's also very cheap for the mana. So that's the fourth benefit, the fourth thing that makes Boompile unique. It's a when, not if. And then the last one, and I think a really important thing to remember, is that it not only has an instant speed activation, but it also costs 0 mana. So if it's turn 4 and you don't need to board wipe, you can still play down the Boompile and just keep it up. Just have it there, ready to go. And so you can keep playing out your plan, you can do what you need to do, and then if ever there's a situation where you're about to die, you've got that Boompile ready to go. Not saying that that's the best way to use it, but if you wanted to use it that way, you certainly could. Very few things can say, I will allow you to get rid of everything on the board. You can keep playing what you need to do. Just wait until you need to use it for 0 mana. So it's like having a free spell in hand if you've got that Boompile out there. And you get to, opponents will see that. Sometimes that means that they're not going to want to attack you. They'll want to try to use their creatures for value by attacking other players. So can you use it as pillow fort? That really depends on your play group. It depends. Your mileage really does vary on that one, because some players will see it and say, oh my gosh, I'm not going to attack that player. I'll attack somebody else because I don't want to get my creatures board wiped away from the Boompile. And other players will say, well, I want to get that Boompile off the battlefield as quickly as possible. I'm going to attack everything at that player so that they are forced to use the Boompile so that they use it on my turn and then I can be the first one to rebuild. So there's, kind of depends on your play group, how they like to play. But regardless, it's certainly a benefit that for 0 mana at instant speed, you can have that effect. So I know I still haven't gotten to the main question of the podcast, but we will get there. First thing I want to talk about are those 3 ways that Boompile can be used in a unique way that gives you a big benefit. So of course you can use Boompile in a pinch, and I've talked about this already. If you've got 4 or 5 mana or 6 mana even, and you need to do something right now so that you don't die next turn, Boompile gives you a 50% chance to be able to do that regardless of your color combination. If you're playing white, Hour of Revelation also does that, as long as you have the 3 white available to pay. But if you're not paying white, Boompile is probably your best option to do that. If you're in a pinch, you've got to get rid of everything. Every other card, top decking that other card, it's going to give you a 0% chance to get out of that situation. Boompile can do it. And when I say that situation, I'm saying let's just imagine it's the worst possible situation that a board wipe could get you out of. You've got one opponent who's got all planeswalkers. They've got crazy planeswalkers. They're going to go ham with some ultimates next turn. You're about to die from that. You got another player who's got a bunch of creatures. They're trying to destroy you because they don't want you to be able to do a combo on your turn or something crazy, and they're gonna swing their whole creatures, their whole board at you. So you've got a bunch of creatures, and then this other player here has a bunch of artifacts and enchantments, and they're about to ping you to death with those artifacts and enchantments. So you got to get rid of all those cards too. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, you got to get rid of everything. You can't leave anything behind, and on top of that, you've got to do it in a way that costs very little mana. If you only have 4, 5, 6 mana available to use. So in a situation like that, Boompile is probably the only card that you can play if you're not playing white. And if you are playing white, there's only one other card that can do it, right? If you've got 4 or 5 mana. If you have 6 mana, there's some other options, of course. But for 4 and 5 mana, that's pretty much it. Okay, so that's the first way you can use Boompile in a pinch. And it's better in a pinch than many other things because it gives you more reach in certain situations that other cards can't. They literally can't do that in those situations. The second way that you can use Boompile to great effect is to lock down the game. So if you have a way to give all your permanents indestructible, or if you have a way to recur artifacts, then you can keep everybody unable to get things down onto the board. So the 2 cards that I think of in terms of this element is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, and Academy Ruins. So let me read off each one of those. Avacyn, Angel of Hope is an 8 mana, 8/8 angel. It's a legendary creature. Costs 5 generic and 3 white. It has flying, vigilance, and indestructible, and it says other permanents you control have indestructible. Academy Ruins is a legendary land. It can tap for a colorless, or you can pay 1 generic, 1 blue, and tap it in order to put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library. So with Avacyn, Angel of Hope, not only does it have indestructible, and not only does it give indestructible to Boompile, it'll also give indestructible to all your permanents. So you can tap the Boompile. If you don't win the flip, no problem. If you do win the flip, you board wipe everybody else's permanents, but not your own. And you can keep doing that over and over and over. Again, Boompile does not sacrifice, and it's not destroying itself because of the Avacyn. Academy Ruins works pretty well, but not quite as good, I would say. It's just a little bit, it's a little bit slower. You got to pay the 2 mana and tap the Academy Ruins. So essentially that's like paying 3 mana. You can put the Boompile from your graveyard on top of your library. You'll draw it for your turn. You then pay 4 mana to play the Boompile out there. If you tap it and win the flip, then you get to immediately put it into the graveyard again and destroy everything. If you lose the flip, that's okay. You get back around to your next turn. Before you draw for that turn, you activate the Boompile again, try to win the flip on that one. And then if you do win, it goes to the graveyard, and then you can Academy Ruins it back on top of your library before you draw your card for your turn. So with each Academy Ruins activation, you get 2 chances at the Boompile activation, is the way that works. So these 2 things are great. If you want to lock down the board, you can do that with Boompile. Can't really do that with a whole lot of other board wipes when it comes to artifacts. Certainly you could do that with Nevinyrral's Disc and Avacyn, Angel of Hope, but you have to wait a little bit before you can do that. So once you get down the Avacyn, Angel of Hope, you can then go for the Nevinyrral's Disc. The Nevinyrral's Disc will have to wait a turn. In that situation, you definitely want to get down the Avacyn, Angel of Hope, because if you play down the Nevinyrral's Disc first, then people can blow it up before you get your Avacyn, Angel of Hope down, or before it untaps, right? Those are 2 things that happen all the time. So if you get down your Avacyn, Angel of Hope, then you've got to wait another turn unless you happen to have 12 mana. But if you don't have 12 mana, then you got to first cast the Avacyn, then next turn cast the Disc, and then wait 1 more turn after that. So it's not as good, I would say. Whereas you could, with Boompile, play down Avacyn, and then next turn, Boompile and go right away. And Academy Ruins, that's 7 mana per turn. That certainly is a lot. Maybe there's something out there that would do it for cheaper, but you get to do that Boompile over and over and over. Also getting, you're getting 2 options from the Academy Ruins compared to just 1 with the Avacyn, Angel of Hope, unless you add in something that untaps artifacts. So that's the third way you can play it, is as a synergistic piece that can combo and lock down the board for you. And then the third, and I would say most important way that you can play Boompile for great effect is in order to get ahead. So let's say you're looking at the board state and you've got plenty of cards in hand, and you might see other opponents that also have cards in hand, but you guys all don't have that much out on the board, but you draw into a Boompile. What you can do is you can decide to play cards that are spells, so like instants and sorceries. You can play those, do what you want to do, not really committing non-land permanents to the board yet, and allow your opponents to do that instead. Then when they've used up cards from their hand, getting a lot of stuff on the board, on your next turn, you can play down the Boompile and pass. You don't have to activate the Boompile right away. You can just wait. So again, depending on how players will play at that point, you can maybe use the Boompile then, or you can wait until later on. What I've seen is more often than not, players try not to commit more to the board. They don't try to attack you because they don't want to lose their things just yet. They'll either wait out on defense, they'll hold up a thing that will protect their board from a board wipe, or they'll attack each other. Those are kind of the things that tend to happen. But if you can make it to the end step before your turn with that Boompile untapped, that is the best thing you can do. So hang out. If you can weather a little bit the storm of being attacked, go for it. If you can't, then you have to use the Boompile. But if you can hold off on that, just wait until the end step before your turn. Then you can tap the Boompile. And then when it comes to your turn, if you lost, you tap it again. So let's break this down a little bit easier. When you tap the Boompile right before your turn, in 50% of the cases, you will win the Boompile flip right there. The other 50% of the cases, you'll lose it. So in that 50% of the times when you lose that first flip, it matters what happens to the second flip. So of that 50%, when you do your second flip at your first main phase, you will win half of that time, and the other half of the time you'll lose it. So 50% times 50% is 25%. So essentially you have 3 options that are happening at different possibilities as a result of this particular game plan for Boompile. 50% of the time you will win the first flip. 25% of the time you will lose the first flip but then win the second flip. And then the last 25% of the time you will lose the first flip and lose the second flip. And there have been some people who say, well, this is the gambler's fallacy. You're basing what happens, on your first time. And actually, no, I'm keeping everything nice and separate. Everything is independent. The thing that happens on the first time, the Boompile, does not affect the possibility of what happens the second time. What's affected here is whether or not you win or lose the Boompile flip determines whether or not you have a Boompile to flip again in the first place. So if you win the flip in the Boompile, that's it. It's gone. But if you lose it, then you're going to have a second chance. And in that second chance, that 50% has to get cut down in half, with half representing a win of the second flip and the other half, the other 25%, representing a loss of the second flip. So when we combine all that information together, 75% of the time when you play it this way, you will win either the first or the second flip. Only 25% of the time will you lose the first 2 flips in a row. And that happens, it's unfortunate, but it happens from time to time. About 1/4 of the time, believe it or not. But 3/4 of the time, you play the Boompile, and this is what happens. You play it down, everybody loses their things, and then, bam, it's your turn. You have your cards in hand. You have your untapped mana. People are tapped out, or if they're not tapped out, they don't really have a board that they can make, and they can't do much. Most people don't play a whole lot of permanents with flash. Some people do, of course. They can play out those cards. That's fine. That's not a problem. But on your turn, you're going to have all your mana up at sorcery speed. You're going to be the first one to go ahead and build the board. This is as powerful, in my opinion, as going first. We know that going first in Commander is a huge, 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 huge benefit. And that's what Boompile sets up. It sets up for you to be able to be the first one to build up your board. You can gain that momentum and go ahead and start working towards defeating your opponents. That's where Cyclonic Rift has a lot of its power. Very famous card. I'm not going to read it off because most people know what Cyclonic Rift does. But Cyclonic Rift only affects your opponents, and so you're the only one with a board wipe. It's like Boompile to a higher degree, which is why it's so powerful, even though as a board wipe, it's not actually permanently removing the problematic permanents. It's just making it so lopsided that even as your opponents are recasting their spells, it's very difficult for them to catch up to you because you still kept all of your permanents out in the battlefield. So that's the third way, like I said, the most important way to use Boompile to get a huge advantage. And I think that's the counterintuitive, but now that it's explained, hopefully more intuitive way to play Boompile to be able to get a benefit. So now we're finally addressing the question that we started off this podcast saying. So is Boompile still good, or is it outclassed now? And in my opinion, I think it's still as good as it ever has been. The only thing that changes my mind in terms of making Boompile good or bad is dependent on how many people are playing permanents that shut down activated abilities of artifacts, or just give their permanents indestructible all the time. Those are 2 things that are going to make Boompile not as good. And instead, you'll have to play things that will either exile it, as for the second case, or play non-artifacts that will destroy things, or permanently remove them, rather. So I'm not seeing a whole lot of that being added into the format. Treasures, which we did talk about, I think, last episode, does have some level of impact into how many cards people are playing that remove all abilities, all activated abilities from artifacts. At this moment, I'm not seeing a high enough level of those cards in the format to say that Boompile is not good. But keep an eye out for that. If you are noticing that because of all the treasure decks running around, a lot of your opponents are playing things that will destroy a Boompile effect, or really they'll remove activated abilities from artifacts, make them impossible to activate, then that's a situation where Boompile might not be as good in your particular meta. If instead you're seeing a lot of players building decks with bunch of indestructible things, yeah, Boompile might not be as good in those situations. Graveyard Recursion certainly falls into this category as well. But from my perspective, I'm not seeing any meaningful change in either Graveyard Recursion, Indestructible Enabling at permanents, like in a permanent way, or activated ability artifacts, removing. I'm not seeing any of those things increasing at such a high rate that I could say that Boompile is outclassed now. So when I'm looking at my decks, I have 16 regular commander decks that I play for fun. And really I play all my commander decks for fun. But I've got 16 that I would say are optimized, and they're designed to try to be viable in a non-CEDH format of all powers. Yeah, I'm playing Boompile in all of those decks still. And I'm still not playing Sol Ring in all of them. There's just one deck that I don't have Sol Ring in, but I do have Boompile in that deck. So, yeah, Boompile, I think it's still very, very good. Every time I play it, I pretty much get the same reaction. Oh, man, I forgot that was a card. Or, oh, wow, I've never seen that card before. And it's always been really, really helpful for me. Of course, there are plenty of times where I'm trying to use it and it's just not working, and it looks like the worst card in the world. But you have to think about every card as being a percentage. Not every card is going to be amazing in every situation. But it has to be amazing enough and or often enough being good in order for you to run it. And I think Boompile, it's very often a very good card. So it's good in both categories there. So that's my perspective of Boompile regarding if it's good or not good. But that's just my opinion. I'm definitely interested to hear your thoughts as well. Do you agree with me or do you disagree? And why? Feel free to leave me a comment at youtube.com/magicalhackermtg or leave me a tweet at twitter.com/magical__hacker. If you want to pick the topic for an episode of the Eminence podcast, just like Marmot, check out patreon.com/magicalhacker. In fact, the episode for the question for the next episode will be, how do you build a commander deck from 0 cards to 100 cards? So I'm excited for that one. I hope you guys are as well. Thank you again to Marmot. Thank you to all of my patrons. And thank you for listening. Stay awesome, everybody.